The biting cold of that winter night lashed the impeccable streets in front of the luxurious Hotel Grand Chevalier. But the real ice was in the general manager's gaze. He walked briskly through the lobby, his Italian shoes echoing on the polished floor like the hammer blows of a relentless judge. In the center of that space, adorned with gleaming crystal chandeliers, stood an old man, his clothes worn, shoulders hunched, and hands trembling as he clutched a worn leather notebook tightly against his chest. The contrast was stark, almost an offense to the aesthetics of the place. The man didn't ask for money, didn't bother the wealthy guests, and didn't make a sound. He simply observed the activity with tired eyes that seemed to carry an ocean of bitter memories. Even so, for the management of that establishment, his mere presence breathing the air, there was a crime. Without any prior warning or attempt at civilized dialogue, 2 security guards grabbed the man by his thin arms with brute force, lifting him from the velvet armchair as if he were just forgotten trash. The leather notebook almost slipped from his fingers, and for an instant, an expression of utter despair crossed the old man's wrinkled face. He tried to murmur a weak justification about waiting for someone, but his words were swallowed by the manager's cutting voice, demanding the immediate cleaning of the area. The disgusted stares of the surrounding guests formed a cruel audience as the man was mercilessly dragged towards the immense revolving glass doors. He did not physically resist the brutality, but the humiliation was irreversibly etched into his spine, leaving a palpable feeling of profound injustice and extreme cowardice in the air of the luxurious lobby. Thrown brutally against the damp sidewalk, the elderly man fell to his knees on the icy asphalt, scraping his hands as he finally let the notebook slip to the wet ground. The bang of the doors closing behind him sounded like a final sentence, sealing the fate of someone who seemed to have absolutely nothing in the world. However, the arrogant manager who smiled victoriously inside the luxury hotel had no idea of the colossal and devastating mistake he had just made in his career. The contents of that old notebook were about to unleash an immeasurable storm that would destroy reputations, reveal secrets buried for decades, and forever change the power structure of that place. If you want to find out who this man really was and how this humiliation turned into the biggest upheaval this hotel has ever seen, subscribe to the channel right now. The damp asphalt reflected the imposing golden lights of the sumptuous Grand Chevalier Hotel, creating a shimmering puddle where the old man tried to catch his breath. His name was Arthur, but to the outside world, he was nothing more than an unsettling ghost, dressed in tattered woolen rags and shoes worn by merciless time. As his trembling, bruised hands groped the ground for his few scattered belongings, there was a silent dignity in his movements that defied recent humiliation. Outwardly, society saw only the frailty of an unwanted homeless man, a visual obstacle in the landscape of hurried millionaires. However, inside, Arthur's mind teemed with sharp clarity and an impeccable memory, harboring a formidable past that contrasted violently with the misery of that cold, lonely night. Inside, in the luxurious warmth of the perfectly air-conditioned environment, General Manager Victor obsessively wiped his hands with a pure silk handkerchief, as if mere proximity to Arthur had infected him with some incurable plague. Victor was the perfect archetype of corporate arrogance, a man who measured human worth solely by credit card limits and the designer labels flaunted in the lobby. He walked back to the reception area with his chest puffed out, a smug smile etched on his perfectly clean-shaven face, displaying his authority like a crown of thorns imposed on fearful employees. For him, expelling that defenseless old man was not an act of unbridled cruelty, but rather a tactical triumph of social cleansing to keep the false shine of his kingdom of appearances absolutely intact and unquestionable before the wealthiest guests. Ignoring the sharp pain radiating from his scraped knees on the hard concrete, Arthur finally reached for the stained leather notebook and pressed it against his chest again, breathing the icy air with difficulty. He wasn't there by chance. begging for scraps of compassion in a world that had completely forgotten the meaning of that word. Every Italian marble pillar of that building, every curve of the main railing, and even the design of the chandelier illuminating the reception area held priceless fragments of his own essence and his youth. To be thrown into the gutter by men who didn't know a fraction of the history of that place was a wound far deeper than any physical aggression, for it represented the deliberate erasure of the invisible legacy he silently carried on the yellowed pages of that old, worn object. Meanwhile, Victor poured himself a glass of expensive champagne at the lobby bar, gesturing theatrically to a select group of foreign investors who watched the scene with restrained approval. He openly boasted of his iron-fisted management, loudly proclaiming that the Grand Chevalier would never allow the decay of the streets to tarnish the aesthetic purity of its high-end clientele. The manager exuded blind arrogance, treating his subordinates with harsh orders and looks of utter contempt, solidifying himself as an unshakable, oppressive force that urgently needed a dose of reality. Each cynical smile Victor directed outside the glass only fueled the throbbing indignation of those watching, drawing a repugnant contrast between his superficial wealth and the extreme poverty of the man he had just cowardly discarded. On the dark sidewalk, bathed only in the flickering, ghostly light of a faulty street lamp, Arthur slowly opened the thick, worn cover of his precious, wet leather notebook. There, protected from life's harshness, were not notes of madness or empty laments of a disoriented pauper, but rather original architectural plans, old sealed contracts, and black and white photographs from a golden age that the entire city seemed to have erased from collective memory. He raised his tired, teary eyes, fixing them directly on Victor's arrogant silhouette, who continued laughing in the comfort of the glass-walled bar a few meters away. At that precise moment, Arthur's paralyzing despair was quickly replaced by a dangerous spark of sharp lucidity and unwavering determination, promising that this night would not end without the devastating truth swallowing the blatant lie. A fine, freezing rain began to fall mercilessly on the city, turning Arthur's night into a true physical nightmare as he desperately tried to protect his notebook from the icy drops. Trembling uncontrollably under the awning of a neighboring building, the elderly man made the difficult decision to return to the service entrance of the sumptuous Hotel Grand Chevalier, in the naive hope of finding some familiar face among the older employees who could help him. His dragging steps through the dark alley echoed his profound exhaustion. But the vital need to prove his identity spoke much louder than the cold that chilled his tired bones. However, before his calloused fingers could even touch the heavy metal doorknob of the back door, the imposing figure of the head of security completely blocked his path with enormous brutality. With a harsh and unnecessary shove to the old man's hunched shoulder, the hard-faced security guard made it abundantly clear that General Manager Victor's orders were absolute and unquestionable in that place. He threatened to call the police immediately if Arthur didn't disappear from that block in less than a minute, treating him with the same disgust reserved for a dangerous and unwanted animal on the streets. The humiliation of being ejected twice in the same night, now under the real threat of being thrown into a damp, cold cell like a common criminal, weighed overwhelmingly on the old man's already hunched shoulders. The rain intensified considerably, soaking his worn clothes and blurring his hazy vision, while the oppression of that luxury empire closed in around him like a veritable inaccessible marble prison. Driven by silent indignation and a growing urgency, Arthur tried to argue in a faltering, hoarse voice, hastily opening the damp notebook to show a document folded between the pages. The strong, merciless wind, however, was faster than his weary reflexes, snatching an old, yellowed photograph from his trembling hands and hurling it violently against the cobblestones of the dark alley. Before the old man could painfully bend down to retrieve his precious memory, the security chief's heavy boot intentionally stepped on the image, sinking the fragile paper into the thick, dirty mud of the gutter. Seeing that fundamental piece of his own history deliberately crushed under the weight of someone else's ignorance was a devastating emotional blow, tearing Arthur's chest much deeper than any physical pain. What the brutish security guard failed to notice, due to the partial darkness of the wet alley, was the exact content of that muddy photograph that now lay destroyed and unrecognizable under the sole of his boot. The image depicted the very moment of the founding of the Hotel Grand Chevalier, and the smiling man in the impeccable suit cutting the inaugural red silk ribbon was undeniably a much younger version of Arthur. A young chambermaid, who had quickly left through the service door to throw out the trash, witnessed the cruel scene with wide eyes, paralyzed by the constant fear of losing her job if she dared to intervene. She vaguely recognized the features of that anguished face on the street, for she had seen it before in an imposing oil painting locked away in the director's office, sparking a dangerous wave of doubt in her mind. The situation, already deplorable and humiliating, reached an unbearable level of cruelty when the heavy service door abruptly opened once more, revealing the impeccable figure of the manager, Victor. Annoyed at having to leave the warmth of his wealthy guests to deal with what he called urban trash, he walked into the rain, clutching a sleek black umbrella with utter disdain. Without any warning or hint of humanity, Victor furiously lunged at the defenseless old man and snatched the leather notebook from Arthur's trembling hands with a violence that sent him staggering dangerously backward. The arrogant manager openly mocked the soaked object, calling it a pile of foul garbage and loudly proclaiming that lunatics had no right to defile the sidewalk in front of his prestigious establishment. Absolute despair gripped every fiber of Arthur's exhausted body as he pleaded, his voice choked with emotion and hot tears mingling with the cold rain, for the return of his most precious possession. That notebook wasn't just a jumble of old, stained papers. It was the only tangible proof of his stolen identity, the last true record of who he had been before the great family betrayal. Victor, however, merely laughed with restrained malice, holding the object out of reach of the old man's weak hands, sadistically amused by the fragility of a man he considered to be less than absolutely nothing. The imminent feeling of losing his last connection to his own past elevated the risk of that night to an unbearable level, transforming a simple expulsion into a true personal annihilation, completely irreversible. To irreversibly worsen the already chaotic and desperate situation, the intense headlights of 3 black armored cars cut through the darkness of the service alley, announcing an unexpected and extremely important arrival for the hotel. Victor froze instantly, his eyes wide with pure panic, knowing that this luxurious fleet belonged exclusively to the majority shareholders of the international fund that had just bought the Grand Chevalier's billion-dollar debts. The manager swallowed hard, hastily adjusting his silk tie with his free hand, while desperately trying to think of a quick way to hide Arthur's soaked body and the notebook he was holding. The pressure became absolutely suffocating, as the presence of a beggar being assaulted at the back door could ruin his coveted promotion to the executive board of the International Luxury Hotel Management Company. Just when the viewer finally believes the story boils down to a bankrupt ex-owner desperately trying to prove his worth to an arrogant and insensitive team, the true dimension of the conflict is brutally revealed. Arthur wasn't there to beg for compassion, ask for a warm room to spend the night, or demand recognition of his glorious past through old photographs soiled with mud and cold rain. The majority shareholders who began to descend from their luxurious armored cars weren't strangers or anonymous investors. They were the same cowardly men who, decades ago, had forged signatures to take absolutely everything from his name. The game instantly shifted from a simple expulsion due to aesthetic prejudice to a head-on and inevitable encounter with the traitors who destroyed his life, transforming the dark alley into the true epicenter of a war. The sound of the armored doors closing echoed through the alley like the cocking of a gun, cutting through the icy tension that stifled everyone's breath. The first man to emerge from the darkness of the luxurious vehicles was Richard, the architect of the betrayal, whose arrogant smile froze instantly upon meeting Arthur's drenched figure. Instead of retreating into the shadows or succumbing to the weight of his frail physical condition, the old man raised his chin in a way that no tattered clothing could diminish. This was no longer the humiliated pauper who had been dragged through the lobby, but the rightful founder meeting his tormentors face to face after decades of exile. The need to act pulsed violently, transforming each drop of rain into burning fuel for the inevitable confrontation that was about to destroy the peace of that empire built on cowardly lies. Completely oblivious to the silent storm brewing, manager Victor desperately tried to save his own skin by taking control of the situation. He quickly advanced toward Richard, clutching the stolen notebook under his arm like a pathetic trophy, frantically gesturing for the security guard to immediately remove the beggar from his sight. It was at that precise second that the breaking point was irreversibly solidified. Arthur didn't back down an inch from the threat. On the contrary, he took a firm step forward. His voice pierced the curtain of rain with a guttural authority that paralyzed those present. He demanded the notebook back immediately, not with the tone of a beggar pleading for alms in the early morning, but with the imposing fury of a usurped founder ordering an insignificant servant to return what rightfully belonged to him. Victor's blind arrogance was brutally interrupted not by Arthur, but by Richard's trembling hand, which gripped the manager's wrist with desperate force. The majority shareholder ignored the dirt on the old man's clothes and fixed his terrified eyes directly on the worn relief of the leather cover of the notebook Victor held with contempt. The blood drained completely from the billionaire's face, replacing his unwavering posture of power with uncontrollable dread before all those present. At that precise moment, the Grand Chevalier's false structure of superiority began to crumble irremediably. The ghost of the past had not only survived betrayal and relentless time, but now held the only weapon capable of annihilating the empire built on blatant lies. Arthur's decision to face the storm transformed that alley into the ultimate court that would determine everyone's fate. The silence in the dark alley became absolute, broken only by the incessant sound of rain beating against the bodywork of imported cars. Victor, completely unable to read the gravity of the situation through his lens of blind arrogance, let out a nasal, disdainful laugh. He tried to pull his arm from Richard's hands, offering the soaked notebook as if it were a bad joke, insisting that the security guard arrest the old man immediately. However, the billionaire didn't laugh. His wide eyes followed every drop of water that trickled down the leather of that object. Richard knew what was inside, for he had spent decades praying that that damned diary would disappear. The general manager's lethal ignorance delivered the loaded gun into the hands of the only man capable of pulling the trigger, completely destroying the charade of his elitist management and revealing the owner of that place. Driven by a desperate need to reaffirm his authority before his superiors, Victor abruptly and theatrically opened the notebook, tearing off the rusty metal clasp. He intended to ridicule the scribbles of a street lunatic, but what he found made his voice die in his throat in a pathetic way. Protected by a thick layer of plastic untouched by time and rain, lay the original bearer share certificates and the non-negotiable deed to the land where the Grand Chevalier had been built. Arthur hadn't lost everything in Richard's scam 30 years ago. He had planted an absolute reversion clause that expired precisely on that cold winter night. Victor's cruel attempt to expose the beggar's madness only served to display the irrefutable proof of fraud before all the members of the International Council who had just disembarked from the armored vehicles. The other investors, men in impeccable suits who controlled untold fortunes, approached slowly under the flickering light of the lamppost, their faces transfigured by disbelief and shock. Upon seeing the authenticated signatures and the golden seal of the original foundation, they instantly realized that the recent billion-dollar acquisition of the hotel was a colossal fraud. Richard had blatantly lied about full ownership of the land, selling a luxury empire that legally still belonged to the man humiliated on the asphalt. The young chambermaid, huddled in the shadows of the service door, watched in stunned silence as the power structure completely reversed, witnessing the moment royalty plummeted from its pedestal. The brutish security guard, who had previously assaulted the old man with utter cowardly contempt, took 2 trembling steps back, realizing with horror that he had just mercilessly beaten the true and only owner of the empire. Desperate and sweating profusely in the freezing rain, Victor tried to stammer a pathetic apology, lowering his designer umbrella and offering it to protect the man he had just thrown into the gutter. Arthur, however, didn't even flinch at this hypocritical change of attitude, maintaining his upright and dignified posture that contrasted sharply with the explicit cowardice of his attackers. He took the notebook back from the manager's trembling hands with surprising firmness, turning his sharp, implacable gaze directly to Richard's rotten soul. The turning point didn't come from a scandalous scream or uncontrolled physical revenge, but from the surgical precision of the truth emerging from the ashes of the past. The manager's own superficial arrogance, judging the book solely by its dirty cover, was the perfect tool the universe used to unmask the billionaire thief in public. Richard's empire of lies crumbled in a fraction of a second under the crushing weight of that inescapable revelation, while shareholders' phones were already ringing with their lawyers. The billionaire fell to his knees in the dark mud puddle, exactly where Arthur had been cowardly thrown minutes before, his gaze lost in a future of financial ruin and inevitable imprisonment. Victor remained petrified and completely silent, clutching a useless umbrella as he watched his promising career and comfortable life evaporate in the cold morning air. Justice, often blind and slow, descended upon the Grand Chevalier alley with the devastating force of an unstoppable lightning bolt. The old man in worn shoes and tattered clothes had not only recovered his unwavering dignity, but annihilated his cruel oppressors, using only the irrefutable silence of his intact evidence. The following morning, the sumptuous Hotel Grand Chevalier awoke under a completely different atmosphere, breathing the air of an implacable justice that swept away the dirt hidden beneath its carpets. The vehicles that had left the premises in the early hours carried away not only Richard, handcuffed and publicly humiliated, but also the blind arrogance of Victor, summarily dismissed and escorted out of his kingdom of illusions. The structure of the empire was reconfigured in hours by the perplexed shareholders, who bowed before the undeniable legitimacy of the documents preserved through decades of silent suffering. Arthur did not seek noisy revenge. His victory lay in the profound restoration of his own honor, proving to the world that true dignity can never be erased by worn-out clothes, transforming the agonizing pain of a cowardly exile into the indestructible foundation of his triumphant return. The hotel's transformation wasn't limited to just changing the plaques in the luxurious executive boardroom. It deeply affected the soul of every employee who witnessed that unforgettable night. The young chambermaid, who had observed the unbridled cruelty huddled in the damp shadows of the service entrance, was immediately promoted to a supervisory and trusted position, receiving the human recognition that the previous management had systematically denied her. Where absolute contempt for the working classes and the exclusive valuing of superficial appearances had once prevailed, Arthur established an environment of genuine respect and authentic compassion, proving that the greatness of a place doesn't reside in the thickness of its crystal chandeliers. The giant revolving glass doors never again closed to the invisible members of society, for the new owner intimately knew the cutting and devastating cold that existed on the merciless asphalt outside. Months after the stormy night that rewrote everyone's destiny, the main lobby of the Grand Chevalier displayed a peaceful scene that erased the scars of the oppressive past. Seated in the same soft velvet armchair from which he had been brutally torn, Arthur now wore an impeccable tailored suit, observing the continuous movement of guests with the unwavering serenity of a true king who had regained his throne through merit. In his hands, resting firmly on his lap, he no longer held architectural blueprints soiled with cold mud, but kept his old leather notebook resting there as a perpetual reminder of his unbreakable resilience in the face of evil. If this story of overcoming touched your heart and showed that true justice never fails before blind arrogance, subscribe to the channel now to learn more about the silent power of absolute truth.